Hi, everybody. Welcome to Woodland Wildlife Wednesdays. We appreciate you being here this month. This month of July, we're going to have emerald ash borer. What are we finding out here in Maryland? So developing strategies for long-term management of tidal forested wetlands decimated by the emerald ash borer. We're going to get an update on some research that's been happening on both western and eastern shore of Maryland. So I'm excited about this talk. So next month, if you want to stay tuned, we have Wildlife of Maryland. Our own Luke McCulley is our wildlife specialist at Extension. He's going to be talking about wildlife. Before we get going, let's do some housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded. So by you being present and staying on with us, you've given us permission that you're okay with it being recorded. So the recordings will be available at our website, and there's the link. I'm your host today, Agnes Kedmanets. Hello, I work for University of Maryland Extension. I coordinate the Maryland-Delaware Master Logger Program, and I contribute to the Maryland Woodland Stewards program. So I have a lucky position here where I get to talk to professionals and landowners so that the landowners can meet their objectives. It's a great position. So if you have any tree questions or want to talk trees or forests, you can give me a call. If you have any questions or comments during the presentation, please use the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Do you see that bubble? If you could put it in there. We're gonna hold the questions to the end of Diane's talk today. That just makes it a little bit more organized for us. We'll have a conversation. So please, questions, comments, put those in the chat. I'd be happy to ask them. And please, as the questions come into your head, you can just put them in the chat and I can ask those. So you guys know this if you've been with Woodland Wildlife Wednesdays before, you get the branching out newsletter. So that newsletter comes out quarterly and it keeps you updated on forestry events that are happening that we are aware of. So that we are hosting or that we're presenting. And you can opt out of that just if you want, and you can send that email saying no events to Pam Thomas. So our webinar today, the emerald ash borer. What are we finding out here in Maryland? The emerald ash borer is causing drastic changes in tidal forested wetlands around the Chesapeake, and the ecological implications are serious. The Environmental Science and Technology of University of Maryland College of Agriculture and Natural Resources Department has ongoing research at tidal freshwater forested wetland sites in Maryland's western and eastern shore to better understand the ecological implications. Ecological implications include tree mortality, ash tree regeneration issues, and the ability of other tree species to replace ash in the wetland system. This presentation will share results from the first 2 years of research, which has been funded by the U.S. Forest Service and the Maryland DNR Forest Service, Department of Natural Resource Forest Service. So our speakers today is Diane Leason, and she is a wetland scientist at the University of Maryland. She joined University of Maryland in 2012 to study the effects of restoring tidal marsh hydrology on vegetation communities and marsh elevation. In 2017, she completed a master's degree in wetland science and has been studying tidal forested wetlands since. Diane enjoys being outside, spending time with her family, walking her dog, and tending to her gardens. And Jonathan Kays will also be speaking. He is the forestry specialist for University of Maryland Extension with over 30 years of experience in teaching, research, and technical assistance. He has developed and implemented extension programs in woodland stewardship, invasive species management, wildlife damage management, natural resource income opportunities, handheld GPS, and wood biomass energy production. He's one of the primary authors of the Woods in Your Backyard guide, first published in 2016, and was revised in first published in 2006, revised in 2016. He's authored numerous extension publication and produces that free quarterly website that I mentioned, Branching Out, that you're going to be getting. So I'm excited today. I'm on the Eastern Shore. Where are you guys from? Let me find out where are you guys from so we can let our guest speakers know where you guys are from. Give you a couple seconds here to fill that in. Great. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. It's nice to see people from all over the state. We have some Southern Maryland, Central Maryland, Eastern and Western. Hello, hello, and welcome. With that, I'd like to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to ask Jonathan Case to start us off here with the discussion. Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay. You can hear me, I hope?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen here. Welcome. I'm going to remove your poll is still up, I think. Okay, yeah, my goal here is to kind of just give a little upfront information to kind of summarize, what we know about EAB at this point in Maryland, which will lead into the presentation by Diane regarding the specifics of what's the research results and stuff like that. So let's see, there we go. Just a kind of a little put things in perspective. So in terms of EAB detections, EAB really came into Michigan around 2002 in Ohio, and you can see the spread of it from there by the color chart here over to Maryland, and spreading out from that central location. And if you look at where we are right now with EAB, it's basically detected in 35 states and 5 Canadian provinces. When we look at Maryland in particular, it really started in about 2003. As you'll see in Southern Maryland, Ed's Plant World, famous for that, imported some stuff from Michigan that had EAB on it. And you can see that from 2003 to 2014, it spread from that Southern Maryland location out to Western Maryland, and not so much into the northern part of Maryland or the Eastern Shore. That started to change as time went on, and starting in 2015, you'll see from this map here, and these are trap results. I put out pheromone traps to see how it's spreading. You'll see the red detections as it started to spread from the western part of Maryland, where it probably got there by people traveling and so on, up into northern Baltimore County, Harford County, a couple of detections over from the shore on eastern Maryland, on the Eastern Shore, to where we are today, where there's not as much trapping going on, but you'll see that there is, this map from 2020, trap results, you'll see that there are a couple of, there is a new detection down in Somerset County. So basically you're seeing a kind of spread down through the Eastern Shore, as you might expect, as it's, carried on vehicles and everything else, firewood, whatever. So here we are toward just in terms of Western Maryland, the effect of all the ash mortality that's occurred through much of the state in Southern Maryland and west of the Bay has really affected forest structure. It's also affected, timber values, because a lot of this was large, ash species that basically had timber value. So a lot of that was lost, Now, in terms of the science of actually protecting trees, that's developed quite well. And in terms of most tree care companies can now, if you have an ash tree that you want to save, there is injections that are possible, somewhere around $8 to $10 a diameter inch. So if you're not going to, if you want to protect a tree, it is going to cost some money to do that every 2 to 3 years. But if it's a special tree around the homestead, it makes a lot of sense. If you're not going to protect the trees, it's better to have them taken down around your house, because they'll cost more to take down once they're dead. We know that this is probably one of the best publications out there in terms of insecticide options. And I posted a few publications that I think Taylor is going to post in the chat box a little bit later. But this is probably one of the best ones out there. In terms of biological control, using wasps that basically penetrate the bark and lay eggs in the EAB and the larva. There's a lot of work going on with that. And there have been some releases in Maryland that you'll see here. There are specific locations, mostly like in state parks in many cases, or I think the Nature Conservancy might have some lands But this is, it's still very experimental. It's, not going to, it's research basically. And some of these populations are expanding, but it's not going to control a serious outbreak at this point. Hopefully there's more hope in the future. And that research will go on. In terms of the ash species affected, we're talking primarily about white ash, which is a upland species. That's what you tend to find in more parts of Western Maryland and upland locations. And what you found down in the swampy areas or the wet areas is green ash. And then when you get over into the eastern shore around, a lot of the forested tidal wetlands, a lot of those areas are green ash as well as pumpkin ash, which is, as you'll see from the range map, extends down into Virginia, and where it's more prominent. It actually doesn't show it in Maryland, but it is there in some locations. It's important to understand that the problem with EAB on the eastern shore is not a commercial timber problem, because you don't really have commercial sized ash on the eastern shore. It's more about the urban, of course, residential areas, but it's really the impact on tidal and non-tidal hardwood swamps. Many of these inaccessible areas. So this is a major ecological problem and not necessarily a commercial problem. And that's why it's so important. And there is, I think, a lack of awareness in many cases in terms of on the eastern shore, because once it impacts, forested tidal wetlands, these aren't areas that people readily see or accessible on a regular basis, except by boat in many cases. This is a map of tidal, non-tidal forested wetlands. Diane has a much better map of this. This probably covers more area than it really is there, but it just put there to show you that this is the potential impacted areas as you go up these drainages and areas that have some tidal exposure. It's not as bad as that, because like I said, some of these areas are actually beyond where you'll find ash. The point is, though, that these areas, there is a lot of areas of tidal wetlands where forested wetlands where ash is the single dominant species. And you can see it covers many square miles up through the Chesapeake Bay, it says in the states of Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia. So it's a very serious issue. And places that look like this, and Diane will talk about this hummock and hollow topography in these wetlands where you have the tidal waters coming into these hollows and very muddy and deep mucky soils, and then these hummocks with the trees and vegetation on them. So these areas are very important for a lot of reasons. And a lot of these ash canopies have been started to be impacted already. One of the sites in 2016 is actually one of the study sites, and there's serious changes in the vegetation, which Diane will talk about in terms of the loss of the canopy and the development of the understory. But the big issue too, as well as these hummock and hollows, is that over time these areas may get washed out and they'll lose their ability to protect water quality and storm surges, problems with invasive species. So these are all serious ecological issues around there. And this is another site here. As you look at some of these sites, you're going to start seeing some defoliation, which I think Diane mentioned. This is one of the areas where you're going to see this soon, sooner than later. So as we move on here, just to say that many of these sites can contain maples, Atlantic white cedars, black gum, and subcanopy. And the question is, what's going to happen to these sites when the ash is lost? And the questions about, the basal sprouts that come out, will they persist? Are there lingering ash trees that, for whatever reason, are genetically not impacted? What's going to be the canopy reestablishment? What's going to happen to these hummocks and hollows? What about invasives? All these questions that come up, which is really basically the reason for that research, to develop a lot of this baseline information and see the impacts. And underplanting trials to try different species, treating mature trees, identifying lingering ash. And what Diane is going to talk about today is really the results, couple-year results of the underplanting studies that have been done, and a couple of other things. So with that in mind, I'm going to bow out and hopefully just kind of giving you a little quick background on everything here. And just to say, the take-home message here are there are vast areas of tidal freshwater wetlands. There's going to probably be some real serious disturbance. The ash is a dominant species. There's going to be some cascading effects, and there's a lot of uncertainty that hopefully this research can bring to light. And that is a publication there on put together a couple of years ago. It kind of identified and talked about some of the issues involved with these Eastern Shore forested wetlands. And I think Taylor can post that later. So with that, I will back out, and just to say that these are areas where, it's difficult to walk around, difficult to access, and you'll see that from some of the pictures that Diane has. And she has quite a job that she's done. So I will say thank you and unshare my screen.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, it looked like some treacherous, muddy muck in there that you guys were going in. So that was a nice visual to see the hard work that's happening there. I know that I went out to a couple of these sites, and you don't want to fall in. You don't want to drop your cell phone. So Diane, your hard work, I'm glad you get to share it with us today. This is great.
So thank you very much for coming. I appreciate your time. My name again is Diane Leason. I am a researcher in Andy Baldwin's lab at the University of Maryland, the Wetland Ecology Lab. And through a grant from the USDA Forest Service, we're working with Maryland's DNR and the Nature Conservancy to examine the impact of EAB on Maryland's tidal fresh forested wetlands. Why do we care about wetlands? Well, they provide a variety of services and functions for us. Functions being those self-sustaining properties, the processes necessary for the self-maintenance, such as primary production and nutrient cycling. And nutrient cycling, by that I mean is wetlands have physical characteristics that cause surface water to move slowly, allowing suspended particulates to settle, thereby influencing the delivery of watershed sediment to lower tidal estuaries. This function traps sediments carried to it in the runoff from uplands or upstream areas and cleans the water for us. Services are the benefits derived from either one or more of the functions of the physical characteristics of a wetland. They're providing wildlife and fishery habitat, they're protecting coastlines from erosion and storm surge, and there's a lot of carbon storage that goes on. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service defines, inventories, and maps all of the wetlands in the U.S., and they produce the National Wetland Inventory. And according to the NWI, Maryland has more than 36,000 acres of tidal fresh forested wetlands. And these are the dark areas shown in this map. The map Jonathan showed earlier included a lot of, okay, so NWI's classification is very fine, their system that they use. And that map showed areas that we don't believe ash are the dominant species. This map and these kind of darker areas in here and all along the bay and the tributaries, those are tidal fresh forested wetlands where we believe ash is the dominant species. And tidal fresh forested wetlands are affected by those areas, wetlands that are affected by the daily and periodic rise and fall of the tide within the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries. They have a distinct hummock hollow microtopography, and the dominant tree species is ash. Pennsylvanica, green ash in most areas, but as Jonathan mentioned, there are areas we have pumpkin ash, in particular, way down here in southern Maryland. That's all pumpkin ash, or at least that's our understanding. The disturbances that are going to result from gap formation and the accumulation of coarse woody debris caused by EAB ash mortality, it's going to have cascading impacts on our plant communities, including the growth of non-native invasive plants, our animal communities, as well as the ecosystem functions and services, which I talked about previously. This graphic is an illustration of tidal forested wetlands. You can see here the hummocks, which is just an area of ground that protrudes above the marsh surface that allows for the growth of woody plants. And then in between the hummocks, in between these rises, these humps of ground, these mounds, are hollows. And those areas typically are not populated or are very sparsely populated by vegetation. It's usually free-flowing water there. And so what you see here is before invasion, this first graphic on the left, the forest canopies are typically very dense, resulting in high shading of the lower strata with moderate to low amount of herbaceous biomass on the hummocks. So there's a few plants that grow here, ferns and some wildflowers, but not a whole lot, and then very little in the hollows. Within 1 to 5 years, you can begin to see a moderate defoliation of the canopy as ash trees die back. The herbaceous strata becomes more abundant as light levels increase. And within 5 to 10 years, within the 10-year time frame for certain, the canopies are extremely sparse and complete defoliation of fraxinus has occurred. The herbaceous layer becomes very dense, including in the hollows. So we get a lot of vegetation showing up in these hollows and sprouts appearing on ash trees, with only the non-ash trees remaining to populate the canopy. What is the extent of loss? Now, in our study sites, it's 100%. These aerial photos give a sense of the extent. This left photo here on the left, this is our Sharptown study site. Sharptown's right there on the other side of the river. And at this point, we've had no impact, and the canopy looks full and healthy. The upper right side, that is our site on the Patuxent. It began showing signs in 2016 of Eab infestation. All of the ash trees are now completely defoliated, and the green vegetation that you're seeing in there is that of the shrub layer as the dead ash trees have snapped or fallen over, and the sprouts from the ash trees. The bottom right is Hillsborough, and at the beginning of our study, and Hillsborough showed no signs of infestation. By the spring of 2020, there were clear signs that Eab was present and had multiplied to numbers that we were seeing damage. This photograph was taken in April of this year, 2021, and you can see significant damage to the canopy. And all along this river, or all along the creek, this is the Marshy Hope, all along this is ash trees all along this river, and it's they're all dying. So the extent is pretty extreme. From the ground, this is what the view looks like when you're standing in one of these tidal forested wetlands. The one on the left is unimpacted, full canopy, lots of shade. The one on the right is impacted, and no canopy remains. You do see some sprouting, but that's about it. It's a complete lack of canopy and significant herbaceous strata following the complete dieback of ash. What to do? Well, the first thing wanted to do was just understand these wetlands. We wanted to describe the vegetation communities, the microtopography, get an understanding of the hydrology, the light levels, and the soils, so that we might identify areas that could be suitable for reforestation projects. But in order to do the reforestation, we needed to conduct some underplanting trials to assess site suitability for either ecologically or commercially valuable tree species. And the species we chose were naturally occur in tidal forest and generally at lower densities, but they could be used to restock forested wetlands and hopefully maintain a forested condition. One of the other things we wanted to do was treat mature ash trees in tidal forested sites along the Chesapeake Bay and its subestuaries where Eab canopy loss has not yet occurred. And the hope there is that we can sustain a supply of seeds for regeneration in portions of the canopy. So we had 4 study sites, 2 on the western shore and 2 on the eastern shore. This is on the Piscataway. This is our Patuxent site, just above, just north of Jug Bay, along Route 4, if anyone's familiar with that area. This is Hillsborough, which is a tributary of Choptank, and then this one, Sharptown, is on the Nanticoke. And in general, this is kind of what an unimpacted site looks like after, of course, we've been there. Trees are falling down still. They still are coming down, snapping or falling, dead trees falling. And then this is what an unimpacted site would look like. So tidal fresh forested wetlands occupy relatively narrow range. They occur where the tides interact with coastal river systems, causing freshwater flooding onto the floodplain. Tidal fresh forested wetlands have distinct microtopography with hummocks. Again, this raised area, this forested ground rising above the marsh surface, and then hollows which exist in between the hummocks. And as you can see, these areas are really flooded. You know, they tend to be filled with water, and when it's low tide, the hummocks are exposed on their sides, but it's still wet and it's incredibly mucky soils. So you step on this, you're going down. you're gonna, I've been sucked in up to my waist. So that means they're just difficult to work in. They're difficult systems to work in. So in order to do that, we installed boardwalks, which minimized the impact, hopefully, and helped us to get around these very mucky soils. So what we were doing is we identified and quantified all the vegetation. We assessed the health of ash trees. We looked at productivity, including above ground plant material, leaf litter, and below ground, the roots below ground. We also monitored water levels and light levels and collected some soil samples. So what does our vegetation structure look like? Again, here's another picture of the forest canopy. On the left, we have an unimpacted site, and on the right, we have an impacted site. So if you compare these 2 canopies, can you imagine which location has more leaf litter, which has more herbaceous litter? Well, the data shows us what you might think. These graphs are the plant litter in 2020. The solid green bars are our unimpacted sites, and the striped bars are our impacted sites. Total woody leaf litter collected during 2020 was higher at our unimpacted sites, as we would expect. And then at the herbaceous material collected in 2020 was far greater than at the unimpacted sites. And this is what that looks like. So again, on the left is unimpacted and on the right is impacted. And what we saw was a shift in vegetation structure and communities. At the impacted sites, these sites right here, you see a lot of burr marigold, water hemlock, tear thumbs, and other annual marsh plant species that have now colonized the hollows. These areas, which normally wouldn't have plant growth, we're seeing a lot of vegetation. And the vegetation that's in there is very dense, producing a lot of biomass. The hummock species, like the ferns and sedges and asters and other wildflowers, are still present, but are shorter than the colonizing annuals, which are spreading over into the hummocks because now there's no trees there blocking, providing the shade. Although shrubs and small trees do persist, we see a lot of American hornbeam, silky dogwood, viburnums, Winterberry holly, and fringe tree. So are we seeing higher productivity than at the impacted sites after EIB? We might, it looks like we are. Another thing that we did was we looked at ash condition to try and understand the health of the ash trees at our sites. Kathleen Knight and others at USDA developed a scale that was used to quantify the degree of decline and dieback of ash trees, which is the ash canopy condition index. Each tree is assessed and it receives a rating of 1 to 5, with 1 being a full and healthy canopy and 5 being a canopy with no leaves and the potentially sprouts present. And this, by sprouting, I mean that when a tree is damaged, it kind of goes into the survival mode and will sprout new growth at the base or along the trunk of the tree. We're seeing sprouts at our impacted sites, at very dense sprouting actually at Patuxent. The trees are trying to maintain themselves. So at our unimpacted sites, there's very little sprouting. At our impacted sites, it's 100%. Every dead ash tree, well, they're not dead, but every dying defoliated canopy has sprouts. And the condition index, the ash trees at the impacted sites primarily are all dead with no canopy remaining and sprouts present. You see, this actually is a little different than what I expected, but I should note that the unimpacted site, this side, the trees, number of trees at the unimpacted sites also includes Hillsborough. So this is showing a shift because we are seeing the effect of EAB at Hillsborough. So some of those trees are not in great health. So what we do know about our sites, as the canopy is lost, more light becomes available, creating a shift in the vegetation communities to more marsh type vegetation with a denser herb layer, fewer hummock species, and an increase in hollow species. With these changes, additional questions come up. As vegetation shift, will the microtopography change? It's very distinct. You know, what's going to happen to that? Will we lose that distinct hummock hollow characteristic of a tidal wetland forest? Will these, with those vegetation shifts, will these wetlands shift from forest to marsh? Will they be able to maintain that characteristic, that hummock hollow characteristic, as the vegetation that contributes to those disappears? And with the changes in flora and fauna, services and functions will still occur and change. So that's a good sign. And at least if it does shift from a forest to a marsh, at least it's still a wetland and providing some services, but you know, they won't be equivalent. One possible solution to maintaining at least, maybe not the entire forest, but maybe portions of the forest canopy is planting trees. But before we can move forward on that, there are a lot of questions that have to be answered. Some of those are, given the hummock and hollow topography, can we plant anywhere? Does it matter at what elevation we're planting? Deer browse is often a problem when planting seedlings. Will they be a problem here in these systems? Will seedlings be outcompeted by the very fast growing annuals at the impacted sites? So we conducted some planting trials, and what those look like. Okay, so we had we looked for naturally occurring trees that are found in these wetlands, and based on availability, we planted 288 seedlings, 96 each of red maple, swamp white oak, and bald cypress. Okay, so naturally occurring bald cypress isn't really in these, but it is a plant that will grow in tidal forested wetlands. So we included that here. The concern about deer browse was addressed by planting seedlings half with shelters and half without. And we weren't sure if they would survive in the hollows, given the continuous flooding. The high water levels was way too much stress, or at least that's what we thought. So we planted them in both the hummocks and the hollows. Planting in hummocks is very, very difficult because they're extremely solid. It's hard to get a shovel in there. It's hard to get a 10 centimeters in, let alone an entire, seedling with all of that root structure, that massive root structure down, especially for these swamp white oaks. In the hollows, there's a lot of vegetation that could easily grow over and possibly shade out the seedlings. So we evaluated different vegetation control methods. This is kind of a schematic of what our study looked like. For the unimpacted sites, we planted in both hummocks and hollows, and they either had a shelter or no shelter. Where EAB was present, it's the same thing, except in the hollows, except over here in these hollows, we did shelter and no shelter, but we also had to deal with the vegetation and the question of would the surrounding annuals outcompete the seedlings? So what we did, we either treated with an herbicide, manually clipped the surrounding vegetation, or did nothing. And for those of you who like numbers, this is the table. Again, 96 of each species were planted. 40 in the unimpacted sites, 48 in the hummocks, 48 in the hollows. Half of each of those were either sheltered or unsheltered. At the impacted sites, the hummocks, it's the same thing, but we added this additional treatment of herbicide, clipping, or nothing done to the surrounding vegetation. And then these are pictures illustrating, hopefully illustrating what we did. This is a hummock, and these are hollows. Trees were either planted with shelter or no shelter. And then we either applied herbicide, there's a picture of Jonathan doing just that, or clipped. And this is, we just literally went in with clippers and clipped the surrounding vegetation. And then nothing was nothing. And what did we find out? Well, we planted 288 seedlings in early April, as I mentioned, 96 of each. Well, that was the hope. But because of COVID and some rain delays, the hollows at Hillsborough were not planted and or were planted later than the others, and they all died. So if we exclude those 24 seedlings, out of the 76 seedlings, we had 43% of the red maple die, 8% of the swamp white oak, and 4% of the bald cypress. So there was a difference in mortality among species. Red maple having the highest mortality. When we looked at how the species did with their shelter, whether they were sheltered or unsheltered, if there was a difference in mortality there, we did not see one. And the same with the elevation, which was very interesting. Again, given the amount of flooding that is occurring in the hollows and how much time these plants spend in flooded conditions, we were surprised to see that while the hummocks had lower mortality rates, it was not a significant difference. And, will these seedlings be outcompeted by surrounding vegetation due to the lack of light? And what we found was that no, there was no significant difference between the treatments. There was a higher mortality if no treatment was done. The lowest mortality was for those that were clipped, but the difference was not significant. In terms of growth, did any of these species outperform one or the other? Swamp white oak. Now this is just of the live trees, obviously. Swamp white oak was taller at the end of 2020. And there was a significant difference between swamp white oak and bald cypress and red maple. However, that said, the swamp white oak also started out significantly taller. No difference was found between red maple and bald cypress in terms of seedling growth, and height did not differ by elevation, shelter condition, or any of the treatments to control surrounding vegetation. If we wanted to see, did that light affect the unimpacted, was there a difference between the unimpacted sites and impacted sites for seedling growth? Bald cypress was tallest at the impacted sites. So it seemed to prefer the greater light availability. there was no difference for red maple and swamp oak. So our study suggests that swamp white oak and bald cypress planted at any elevation without shelters and without clearing will survive. There's no need for shelters or clearing the surrounding vegetation, which is good news as the cost of planting is lowered. You don't need to spend money on shelters, manpower to install shelters or clear the vegetation or pay for, herbicides. Additionally, I think I mentioned this earlier, the ease at which planting in a hollow is so much easier. You can almost just plant it, just stick it in the ground. There's really not a whole lot of effort required to open up an area in which to put it, as opposed to having to plant in a hummock. It's very, very difficult to do that. So what we've also done is expanded the chemical treatment, triage in this case, of ash trees on the Nanticoke. DNR and TNC had treated some areas on the Nanticoke, some trees on the Nanticoke. We went out and expanded their treatment locations, the locations in which trees were treated, and we'll be monitoring those sites this summer to see if we see any impact, assess any damage, do some vegetation studies, collect some water quality information, and sample soils. We'll continue to monitor our sites and seedlings this year with the final results out next spring and continue to do some outreach. Well, EAB has and will have a massive impact on our tidal fresh forested wetlands in Maryland. It hasn't yet established itself in the vast forests on the lower eastern shore where ash trees dominate the landscape. You're going to see a dramatic loss in forested wetlands accompanied by major changes in ecosystem services, including shoreline protection, water quality, vegetation communities, and fish and wildlife habitat. Additional management practices of chemically treating selectively is hoped to provide seed source for future regeneration. On sprouts and seedlings, the sprouts on the damaged ash trees and the seedlings that can be installed may be ineffective at maintaining at least a portion of the forest canopy. We've shown that seedlings will survive, so wide-scale planting could be cost-effective as planting is easily done in the hollows, and you don't need the additional resources to purchase and install shelters or treat surrounding vegetation. With that, I'd like to thank the Forest Service for funding this work and our partners at the Nature Conservancy and Maryland DNR. And now I'd like to answer any questions you might have.
Great, Diane. The very great work that you're doing there. Interesting findings. And you got a lot of ground covered there, a lot of variables you covered in there with the hollows and the hummocks and the application to kind of control that vegetation around it and some growth. You guys did a lot of analysis. So thank you. So there are some questions in the chat. Feel free to continue to add any questions that you have in the chat. That's good. You mentioned collecting seeds. Is that something that you're doing on these sites, or is that something the listeners can kind of help out with, or tell us more?
Sure. So the problem we are having right now with seed collection is at our impacted sites, of course, there's no seeds to collect. And at the unimpacted sites, generally, the seeds are so far up. Like we physically cannot reach them. We have no way to get them and don't have the materials to get them when we do see them. Now, we were along the Nanticoke when we were treating the trees along the Nanticoke. Some of those trees, the manner in which they grow, they're reaching out over the river, so we can pull our boat up underneath of it and kind of try and grab some, and which we've done. So yeah, but there is a seed collection In Colorado, I think there's a seed bank. I think it's in Colorado. There's a seed bank. You could probably Google that and find it very easily. But yeah, if you have access to ash seeds and want to contribute to that project, I'm sure they'd welcome any assistance.
And who would they be? Like, who would that be?
You know, I don't know who that is. I'm sorry to say, but so who might that be? I would suggest Googling it, but if you don't have any luck, Colleen Kenny at Maryland DNR, she manages all of the state chemical applications to treat these trees, and I think she's aware of who that would be.
Great, good advice, good advice. Okay, so we have a question here. This was kind of towards the beginning of the talk. Do you see any difference in mortality by tree size? In particular, do seedlings and saplings survive? And if so, at what size do you see them dying?
Yeah, so our study sites are, we haven't aged them yet. I still want to do that. So there's not a huge variety at our study sites in terms of sizes on DBH. But it has been shown in forest situations that seedlings and saplings can survive. And I want to say it's up to a 4-inch before EAB had there has to be enough, the tree has to be a certain size before EAB can lay its eggs in it. So, and I think that's 4-inch. So it's relatively small.
Huh. Wow. Okay. Okay. Interesting. So looking out for even those 4 inchers. Okay, great. Somebody was asking about EAB in Washington County or Western Maryland, where there's different topography. Are you guys thinking of doing any experiments up there, or focusing on anything up there, or have any information to share with the people in Western Maryland?
No, I don't. We are wetlands. Our focus is primarily wetlands, and for this study, it's solely tidal fresh forested wetlands.
Okay.
So
That's
so
where
I'll
our
just
funding is. But Jonathan, Jonathan
Yeah.
might have something.
Yeah, so I kind of provided a response there, and I think, again, the difference is that most of the upland ash is a little different animal for sure. And I did post a link to a fact sheet that we had, that a lot of the material we got from Ohio, in fact, and it's on EAB and the woodland owner, and provides various management options depending upon the amount of mortality. But I can tell you just from personal experience and being out in the woods and stuff, that what I see in a lot of areas is, as that canopy dies out, depending on what percentage of the canopy it is, but even regardless, what I tend to see is that the invasives start taking over. You start seeing just a whole lot more multiflora rose, or especially and other invasives kind of taking advantage
Honeysuckle.
of the honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle, Japanese, taking advantage of the increased light in the understory. So it's kind of sad. That's what I see pretty much everywhere. So.
Okay, well, good input. I hope that helps the Western Maryland folks that are curious. Yes, there was a hope that this was going to be recorded. Yes, it's being recorded. Yeah, please share. And Jonathan put in the chat there the website to go check out where you can find this recording, and where you can find our other Woodland Wildlife Wednesday recordings. So please, yeah, share the links with others that you think would find this of value. We got another question here. Do we have idea of how many sites or locations with lingering ash? Odds of a lone ash out there with some sort of biological resistance? Hey, there's hope. I like that. This is
that is something, we had hoped to participate in that lingering ash, and we are participating in that lingering ash, but we have yet to find anything. And some of that may be that it's still a bit early for our sites, except for our Piscataway site. That site was infected some time ago, possibly at the very early start in Maryland, but we aren't seeing any lingering ash there. But the hope is that they exist elsewhere, so hopefully they exist in the Mid-Atlantic as well.
So can you
We-
help me understand what a lingering ash is? And, you know, if I'm walking around and I'm looking specifically for a lingering ash, what do I look out for? Or-
Sure. So the idea of lingering ash is that there are going to be ash trees out there that have some kind of defense built into their system, some way to combat the effects of EAB. So you're going to see other ash trees around it that are dead and or completely defoliated. Maybe not dead yet. Maybe they're pushing up sprouts. And then you'll see a tree that's got its canopy. I mean, it's going to be obvious because if you remember some of those photos that I was showing you, when you see an area that is an ash dominated area impacted by EAB, it's just a stick. There's no branches, there's no leaves, there's no nothing. So if in that area, if there happens to be a tree that has some leaves on it, that's a clue, and that should be reported. Yeah.
Great. So I found out that Colleen Kenny no longer works at the DNR anymore. So,
Oh no, I didn't know that.
sorry to break the news to you, Diane. Sorry to break the
Yeah,
news.
because it's funny. I thought we were going out this summer. I guess we're not.
So hopefully there's somebody in the DNR there that we can connect with if we have any ideas of where to collect seeds or do anything like that. Thank you for the excellent presentation. So I'm a volunteer at Jug Bay and we're conducting a small EAB monitoring for 2 stands of treated ash trees. Unfortunately, we are continuing to find EAB. Should we be reporting our findings somewhere?
I don't think that they're collecting that information anymore. Just because they know it's there, they don't have the funds, kind of thing. They had to move their priorities around. Yeah.
Okay.
I wonder if what they're saying there is that whether the impact of the treatments, but and again, I think there's different treatments, whether that's a soil treatment or injection. And of course, the big thing with treatments is that, you know, there are limitations. You know, if the tree is too far gone, I think it's what 70% of the canopy needs to be intact, and it's never a given. It's not a given that even when treated, the tree is going to survive. So.
Right. So there's 2 different ways to read that question: reporting EAB damage or reporting the findings that they have from their 2 stands of treated trees.
Right.
Right. Good point. Hey, you know, if you want to do an EAB presentation, you know, contact me. I'd be happy to facilitate something like that about your project. So, you know, if that's something that you're considering, let me know. My name's Agnes Kedmanetz. I work for University of Maryland Extension. So she goes on to say, it was interesting to see the locations of the sightings on the map at the start of the presentation, but I wasn't sure if that was an official survey.
Oh yeah, that is the Maryland map. DNR put that out, right? Isn't that right, Jonathan, or MD?
No, actually, it's the Department of Ag, the Forest Health Division does the Forest Pest Management Division. I guess it is.
Can you repeat that? So Department of Ag Forest Pest Management Division comes.
It's something like that. Yeah, the Forest Pest. They've done trapping, you know, for EAB as well as other things. But they're not doing much traps at this point, except I guess on the Eastern Shore they are seeing they have some traps there. I don't know how many.
Yeah, somebody mentioned that there's one close to their house. Yeah.
See, they're big purple traps, if that's what they're still using.
Any thoughts? Any thoughts of funding for further underplanting projects with floods and in particular salt tolerant species for insurance against future saltwater intrusion potentially?
Yeah, that would be great. No, I don't have any sources, but if somebody knows of some sources, that would be fantastic. And yeah, the saltwater intrusion is an issue. Yeah, and I'm not sure what's going on with that. Actually, one of the areas that TNC had treated on the Nanocoke, we had hoped to work in that site, but the trees look really stunted. The area looks really bad. And Matt Whitback is of Blackwater, believes that area is right now beginning to show signs of saltwater intrusion. So it's not certain yet how that's going to be managed or handled.
Okay.
Hey,
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that I looked through my notes and I found the information for the seed collection location. Should I add that into the chat?
Whatever you'd like, Diane. Yeah, whatever you like, everybody.
It's the National Seed Laboratory, if anyone's interested. And it's, they work in conjunction with U.S. Forest Service, I think. U.S. Forest Service. I'm just going to write this information down, and who's ever interested, they can grab that.
That's a good segue. So this next comment here, collecting seeds on difficult to reach branches. One thing that works for some species is to shoot the branch at the
right.
That's what right when you were saying that, I was like, oh
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you can also get those poles. I'm not sure what they're called, lopper. I don't know. There's some kind of big giant pole with like a knife on it you can get to get things, and maybe a rope. And we haven't yet tried that, just because we're not seeing a whole lot of seed production, or have not seen a whole lot of seed production, which we're not sure why that's happening either. But the other issue is just carrying some of this equipment out is difficult. And yeah, I don't want to shoot a branch. I don't think I could do that.
I'll just comment. We used to do a lot of seed collection on, and then the other way to do it is basically just cut have a chainsaw and cut the tree down.
Oh yeah, we're not doing that.
Well, I mean, you're cutting down one tree. If you're cutting down one tree to get seeds, it's
well,
minimal.
I'm not. I know you've been out there. Can you imagine walking around out there with a chainsaw trying to cut a tree down?
Yeah.
Right. Steady on your feet. Safety first, girl. I hear what
safety first. Yeah, I'm not taking a chainsaw out there. Someone else might want to. Although we did. Yeah. Anyway, that's another story.
I'm not saying you're going to do it. I'm saying I'm saying that to basically be able to do that. That's not in the plot, obviously, but anyway.
Great. So yeah, this person goes on to say that they worked on a genetics project once, and they had a rifle in their kit. So yeah, I think that's interesting.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, so do you think that swamp white oak and bald cypress would be worth planting in the uplands where the ash trees have been affected?
So no, because swamp white oak and bald cypress need water. They are obligate plants. They need to have a lot of water around them, so they would not survive in an upland situation.
Okay. Thank you for your input. We got it. So Maryland DNR collected ash tree seeds at ARS. Kevin Conrad was Colleen's contact. They're mainly interested in pumpkin ash seeds. Not sure if they are still collecting. Well, thank you for that info. Good. So
yeah, they were looking for pumpkin, but this National Seed Laboratory, according to Kathleen Knight, who kind of started this whole ash, is a very prominent researcher in this. They established protocols for the National Seed Laboratory and are collecting seeds of any frax in this species. But yeah, I think Colleen was interested, or the folks she was working with were interested in pumpkin ash.
Great. A question here. So you had mentioned that there was an increase in the holly species in the impacted sites. So interesting. So is that a wetland obligate plant also, or?
So if you're, that's Winterberry, the Winterberry holly, the shrub. And yes, it is. Not the tree, not the American holly tree, but the Winterberry holly shrub.
Okay, that's what's coming up.
Yeah.
Okay, so was that prevalent prior to, do you think, or is that?
Well, it exists. It exists, and it is a wetland species. So as more light becomes available, it's just gonna, get stronger and become more dense, which is what we're seeing with the
Great.
shrubs as well.
You mentioned earlier on in your talk, oh, sorry, Jonathan, did you want to comment?
No, I was going to comment on the uplands, on the species you recommend in uplands.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, please,
Yeah.
please.
So we're talking about a totally different animal, and there is a lot of tree planting that goes on in upland, wetland areas, and swamp white oak is one of those, but there's a lot of others. There's pin oak, there's maple, there's a number of things, but the big difference there as well is that deer is an issue, and you're typically not going to plant those things in wetlands or anywhere an upland site without tree shelters. It's just not because of the deer impact. So there's a lot of work there on planting upland sites, wetter sites, and of which ash used to be a primary species, but not anymore, of course. So and that would depend upon where you are in the state. So I would say that the local forester or DNR forester could provide some, suggestions on that, on planting recommendations and stuff like that.
Great.
Yeah, and the master gardeners in your area can as well.
Well, master gardeners, are more involved with planting residential areas and things. I would, if I'm going to plant a natural area, I would contact a forester or somebody, because
Yeah.
we're planting native species and not varieties and things like that. So
You can contact us here at Extension. You can contact your local state appointed forester. So the wealth of knowledge there. And then, the state has the nursery there too, that you can order trees. That was one of my questions. Where did you guys purchase your trees from?
We ended up from getting them all from Mid-Atlantic natives, just because they had all of the species that, and I wanted just to kind of be consistent. They had all the species that I wanted in a size that was a reasonable size. The state nursery did not have a couple of species. We had hoped to use Atlantic white cedar, and unfortunately, nobody had Atlantic white cedar available at the time. So we ended up with those 3 species. We were looking for Nyssa, swamp tupelo, Nyssa biflora, but we were unable to find that as well. It's not commercially available. I had no luck finding it.
Right.
So that's how we ended up with the bald cypress and the swamp white oak and the red cedar, red maple.
Forest Service folks. So it was the Atlantic white and the tupelo that would be, okay. I hear what you're, okay. I'm just putting a request out there without putting a request out there.
yeah, so Atlantic white cedar is, there's a lot of interest in growing that. But the real challenge is it's very difficult to grow in nursery context, and it's almost impossible to find in any quantities that's affordable. So maybe that's something that be remedied in some way, but I know that was definitely a target species, but there's a lot of these sites would be good sites for some of those things, but
yeah.
Find it, yeah.
All right, you guys. So I see that it's 1:05. So there's a question here. So what species? Oh, okay. So that was already in. There was where on the Nanacoke? Where is this?
So our study site, the one I talked to about Sharptown, where we're conducting these vegetation studies, is just literally at the foot of the bridge across from Sharptown. As you're going into Sharptown, it's on the foot of the bridge on the left-hand side where that little pull-off area is on the right, but our study site's on the left. And if you were referring to the treatment sites on the Nanacoke, they're spread along from the mouth on up to, I'm drawing a blank, Brohorn Creek.
Great. somebody was saying here that they established sugar maple before the ash died. We have a lot of them in our area. However, they had no luck with establishing the sugar maple before the ash died. All
I'm
right.
not sure where that is, where in the state that is. Are they talking about it just depends. You know, sugar maple is not a one that tends to like to have its roots wet. So I'm not sure how well that would do.
They were in Frederick County, just to give you some context of that that.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So yeah, sugar maple should grow in Frederick County, but just
Yeah.
like anything else, they need to be, you know, be maintained as well.
Maybe it was too wet for them, eh?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just I'm not sure the details.
Right. So there's some information about the state nursery. They have they have some stuff there. So you guys, I'm seeing that unless there's any more questions or comments, we appreciate the comments and the questions that you all put in there. I love seeing the conversations happening. Diane, Jonathan, thank you for joining us. Any parting wisdom, any advice for landowners?
Keep an eye out, you know, pay attention to what's going on. Don't buy invasive species. watch what you're working with there. But thank you for your time, everyone. I appreciate having an opportunity to speak with you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Andy Baldwin at umd.edu.
Great.
Likewise to me as well. All right, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
And-
you.
And
Have a
there's
good day.
thank you. There's the link in the chat there for the county foresters if you want to find a county forester in your county. So we thank you for joining us for this Woodland Wildlife Wednesday. Next month, hang on, it's going to be Luke and he's going to be talking about wildlife of Maryland. So join us next month for Woodland Wildlife Wednesdays. Thank you, you guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Diane.
Bye-bye.